The Big 12 made big news in turning down the Tigers, and Memphis is sent back walking. Christian, there's some sort of a song about that.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It is a crossover edition of Locked On Cougs and Locked On Kansas State. Cougs and Cats getting together. I'm one of your hosts, Parker Ainsworth, joined by Christian Rauh. And Christian, I typically open with a weird food question. Of being really honest, you admitted you had some Thai soup for dinner tonight, but I feel like the conversation I really want to have is about Memphis barbecue, but that might just be because we're talking Memphis Tigers all day long. In the state of Kansas, are you more in the Tennessee, Memphis-y side of barbecue, or are y'all more in the beefy, Texas-y, Carolina? How do you do the red meat up there in Kansas?
It's all over the place, right? Obviously, you got the Kansas City barbecue as well. Man, I'm one of those weird ones though, and I think it's from being in the military and being all over the place. I like Carolina barbecue. I don't know what it is. Always have. And that's the one that really gets me. So and that's where I think I've got most of my barbecues, and maybe that's why that's where I stick to. Probably not going to be the favorite of the picks for my. But
I think you probably just upset. I think you might have just upset both sets of fan bases, if I'm being really honest. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. We got more on that fun later. How to save you some money on tickets, but we are spending a segment, probably two segments in different ways, talking about the Big 12 denying Memphis per reports, even though they were potentially bringing a lot of cash and money. And speaking of cash and money, we have a third segment about the NIL collectives coming back. We think it's what it sounds like things are happening.
Were they ever gone?
Were they ever really gone? Christian, I gotta ask you because the Houston Cougars know Memphis. It's Conference USA, American, fun times. You saw this report as a Kansas State person and thought, what?
Well, after the report that I saw initially was that they attempted, they had the number amount of $200 million, and the fact that the Big 12 was just not interested at all. So it was bold. That was my first impression was, wow, Brent Yormark said he's open for business, but apparently not for everybody. He's bold. He's looking for something. What is he looking for? It's not Memphis. And it makes you kind of dig back and try to peel back the layers of what exactly can Memphis bring to the table and why that $200 million price tag isn't enough to make it enticing for the Big 12. And then I personally went to my first gut reaction and was saying, well, if they don't want Memphis, then that means they're probably waiting for a bigger avalanche to fall. And in my mind, that is the ACC. So maybe that's where they're at. I don't even know if that's the case, but I guess Memphis is just not good enough. You know, that basketball school is not enough. We see sometimes they do well in the American, but hey, there was another team that just joined the Big 12 that was in the American and did well in the American, made the college ball playoffs in the American, and it hasn't done really quite well in the Big 12 either. So
you might have upset people with your barbecue takes. You made everyone very happy by saying Memphis is not good enough, at least on this half of the audience. So for the folks at home that maybe are like living in a rock, like, what are you talking about? Memphis, it was reported everywhere between 150 and $250 million in sponsorship deals they were offering the Big 12. They would also foot their own bill to exit the American Conference. The sponsorships would come through places like FedEx, Lowe's, and AutoZone, each of whom have a CEO or C-suite executive that is a high-ranking person, an alumni at Memphis on the board or what have you. Memphis would also have taken $0 in TV revenues, much like how SMU bought their way, so to speak, into the ACC. And they were also willing to have this weird expulsion clause wherein the offseason of 2031, after the 2030-31 school year academic athletic seasons, the Big 12 could vote and expel Memphis if they thought they didn't live up to their end of the contract that essentially was buying their way in. And I have to say, I'm like you. We can look ahead to what's happening down the line and who Brett Yormark might mean when he says he's open for business. I, as a school that just got to the Big 12, as someone speaking on their behalf, I should say, found this really interesting because, I wonder aloud, how much of this has to do with the rocky transition that American Conference schools, Central Florida, Cincinnati, and Houston have had. Houston has run the conference in basketball, and I will tout that as a revenue sport that it is. Football's gone back-to-back 4-8 seasons with a coaching change there in the middle. I think things are in the right direction. They did just are working to complete a $160 million facility they're moving in this weekend. But Christian, and obviously Houston beat Kansas State in the second iteration of that football game. The first one 2 years ago felt like a welcome to Big 12. Do you think that had anything to do with this?
Yeah, well, for the record, thanks a lot for reminding me about that Kansas State game. I mean, that's when the Kansas State season's wheels fell off was against Houston last year. And in my gut, I think you are becoming a small little rival to Kansas State because, hey, maybe that's the case. I am a little ticked that we don't play each other this year because I want revenge. But either way, when I look at Memphis, right? This is exactly what I was thinking here. Looking at initials, and then obviously it's been a little bit of time now to actually think about it. They could bring a decent basketball program to the Big 12. They could, right? They're a decent basketball program. They find themselves potentially in a large bid if they didn't win the American this past season. Great. In the eyes of Brett Yormark and how he wants to build this be a good basketball conference as well, that's fantastic. But there's been also other rumors, Parker, that's where it's not just Memphis that have potentially been additions to the Big 12. When you're talking about purely from a basketball standpoint, there's talk about Gonzaga, there's talk about UConn. When you put those three programs together, I think Memphis is easily the third choice out of those other three programs when you're thinking from a basketball standpoint. Now, unlike Gonzaga and technically unlike UConn, because they don't have a football team, at least anything competitive, Memphis does have some more of a football team. When you look at the American, Memphis usually fights with Tulane, UTSA for that top type of football presence in the American. But going back to what I said in my initial first thing, Cincinnati was great in the American. They found themselves one of the 4 teams in the college football playoffs. And since they've been in the Big 12, now obviously they had coaching changes as well, not much has happened there. So I'm with you. I wonder if there's anything to do with the G5 teams coming to the Big 12, not showing immediate success, especially in the football side of things, to where they're like, hang on a minute, maybe we don't want you, Memphis, even though you're bringing a $200 to potentially $300 million price tag with you.
Well, you mentioned 2021 Cincinnati winning the conference, going to the college football playoff, really on kind of a 2-year run they had there. I would point out that Houston played them in that conference championship game. Houston was at near the top of the conference and was coming off of a Final Four in the spring of 2021. On the basketball side, they beat Auburn in the Birmingham Bowl, so beat Auburn in their own backyard. Within the decade prior to that, like in 2015, right, they're 13-1, win the Peach Bowl, beat Florida State in that. And there had been a dip after Tom Herman left, admittedly, but you could argue that Houston was in a good spot too when they accepted the bid to the Big 12 in terms of football things, and things have kind of spun out of control. They fired Dana Holgorsen the whole night, right? Central Florida, undefeated in 2017. They call themselves national champions. I think they still sell the T-shirts. I guess it's a little bit further removed than we're talking, but like each of these schools had also found success relatively recently to their bid in the American, even if that's not relatively recent to now. And I think that it has been an interesting telltale thing for these power conferences pulling in schools like, hey, be ready for some lean years. Like Houston's investing. It's in a good spot as far as like location and that kind of stuff goes. It's just going to take time to rebuild. I think Cincinnati and Central Florida could do the same. BYU obviously was, a great contender last year and is not quite an American team, but was brought in the same kind of wave. I got a lot of thoughts on this. I want to get to, though, Christian, the conversation of like why this came out like it did and who does it benefit, because I think that's an interesting portion. But before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Now, if you want to get to a Kansas State game, a Houston game, a local baseball game, a comedy show, a theater, whatever you want to get to, Game Time is the best place to get there with the last minute ticket deals. If you ever decide at the last minute to head to that ball game with your family, game day, you realize you want to be in the stands, you just got to be there. Game Time is the best way to do that. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, low price guarantee. I really like for those non-athletic things when you're like going to a big basketball stadium. You see what's going to look like in that venue for that event from that section and row, so you know kind of what you're getting into. You also can toggle it over and make sure you're getting exactly what you pay for, know exactly what kind of cost you're looking at. Take the guesswork of buying tickets. Game Time down the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code Locked On College. LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Christian, this news comes out on Monday afternoon. Ross Dellinger hit send. I believe he had it first. McMurphy, Front Office Sports, NBC, they all had it. I think Dellinger had it first. Someone told him to hit send.
Right.
I've been trying to figure out who that is. You alluded to Yormark open for business. Is this about something else coming down the pipeline? Do you think the Big 12 wanted this leak? Was it Yormark or a president of a Big 12 university that said, hey, hit send, Ross?
I like that thought process, right? And let's go ahead and play that. Let's say that that's the case. Let's say the Big 12 wanted this leaked. And here's why. Here's why I think that was the case. Because they want to push Memphis maybe even more. Maybe they think that $200 million mark isn't enough. Maybe Memphis is a potential suitor. Maybe they do see them as someone who can be in the running. Or even more, hear me out here, it lights the fire under some other program that makes more sense to hop to the Big 12. Oh, wait, Memphis said 200 mil? Memphis is giving this type of package saying you can take us out in 2030, 2031. Well, we have a better football program. We have a better basketball program. Our facilities, that's a big thing that Memphis doesn't have, right? Is actual good facilities. We have those. We are ready for Big 12. Memphis would have to do a lot. That 200 million would not be enough. So maybe that's Yormark and the rest of the Big 12 leadership saying, let's just push this a little bit. We're in no rush. We're at 16 teams. We're very happy where we're at right now. We play more conference games than most other major power schools, power programs, looking at USCC and your week conference schedule. There's just a lot of things that the Big 12 does right. And when you look at the parity from top to bottom, especially in football, it's the deepest. I mean, you could do it in basketball too. It's the deepest conference in all of college athletics. So when you are ready to add, there's no rush. So if you want to add Memphis in the future, great, but sweeten that pot. If they obviously want to come because this got leaked and this wasn't an invite. This wasn't an invitation. So now Memphis has no fighting ground. I mean, did you see that they put a graphic out like 2 hours later saying that they're here for the American? Like, really? Like Memphis social media account must be run by like a 60-year-old guy. Like thought it was a Facebook post or something.
And Kansas State fans might not get why I'm like, it was funny. Houston and Memphis did build up somewhat of a rivalry in their time in the Conference USA and American years together. And it is funny to laugh at them. I will say, in full disclosure, like, I enjoyed the food. There's the hotel with the ducks. Like, I get the occasional visit. I wouldn't want to live there. But whatever. And
I just don't know if location makes sense for the Big 12 either, though. Like, you already brought in a Florida team. You already have teams in the South. If you're gonna add, then I mean, if you're talking again in the basketball standpoint of things, the three teams that I mentioned, Gonzaga in the Pacific Northwest or UConn in the Big East, I mean, you're talking about adding a different time zone that you wouldn't have if you were adding with Memphis, right? I just don't see how that makes more sense when there's other suitors that could follow suit.
And UConn's also kind of ESPN school. Stores is right there in Connecticut. That's the reason that women's program got I mean, they were good too, but Tennessee was good and did not get the same kind of coverage, right? In women's basketball.
You get more with UConn than just a good program. You get media, which is a huge thing when it comes to money right now.
When you mention ACC, I wonder if this is like a, hey, UConn, hey, Gonzaga, whatever the case may be, like, you got to sweeten your offer. We're turning down $250 million from a school with a mediocre football program. Like, you need to be better than what you're doing. You need to invest more in the facility for your football. Put more in towards that. Or if you're UConn, or hey, if you're Gonzaga, you need to do be willing to accept this portion of a share because we're turning down free money from Memphis. We don't need to give you anything. Like I think those conversations all have to be happening. I would also point out that Memphis feels like a school that's always going to be there. They're not really an ACC or a Big Ten school academically. And I don't mean this to throw shade at other schools. I mean, there are smart kids at every school in America. But I will say that they don't have the kind of reputation and mission standards, et cetera, of Stanford, Cal, Duke, even North Carolina, certainly not Virginia in the ACC. In the Big Ten, they've got Purdue, Northwestern, Michigan, high-end schools, right? They're not an SEC school for a bunch of other reasons either. The Big 12 knows they're just going to be sitting there waiting on them while they figure this other stuff out. And I wonder if it's also like, hey, you can throw the money you want at us. You need to build a football stadium on campus. like you need that kind of stuff in-house in a weird way. Christian, obviously, Kansas State, I'm a big fan of Jerome Tang. His high school days to Texas, he spent time with the Baylor staff too, but he feels like a very Texas high school basketball coach to me. And
sure.
So I do root for him when he's not coaching against Houston, I promise. On the basketball side of this, we mentioned UConn and Gonzaga better programs. There are other better programs where the ACC falls apart, but that's not today's show yet. We can get there. I also think that the basketball program being the selling point for Memphis hurts them because they're always in trouble. they just got dinged last Friday. There was the whole James Wiseman thing. Derrick Rose. It's not just Penny Hardaway. It was Derrick Rose and Calipari before that. I mean, and those are just the big national ones. They get dinged on smaller scales more often. Christian, I don't think Brett Yormark wants those problems.
I don't either. No, I don't either. And I think that's why you're going to have to take a lot more to not only take a subpar football program. Yes, the basketball thing might be great, but you don't hear UConn having those issues. You don't hear Gonzaga having those issues, whether they have a football program or not, right? So I'm with you 100%. I mean, you just talked about James Wiseman. That was over 10 years ago now, and you can bring up the name and talk about what happened at Memphis, and if you're a sports fan, you know exactly what happened. I mean, we were hearing about show clauses and things like that, and restrictions and things for years in the future because of that. So. Yeah, I don't think they want to deal with that. They're trying to build a conference that will compete with the Big Ten and the SEC. And hopefully when they do come down to, when we are at a Power 5, now a Power 4, eventually could be a Power 3 conference, assuming that maybe something happens to the ACC in the near future, then you're going to make sure you have to pick the right teams to join your program. And I just don't think Memphis is where they're at right now. They're going to have to sweeten that pot. They're absolutely going to have to.
Houston had a bunch of fun athletic contests with Memphis. Comeback victories in football. Tremont Mark beats them on a half-court buzzer beater. In basketball, Jamal Shedd hits his own game winner, I think 2 years later in basketball as well. They've had fun moments with that school that make a real rivalry. So I get the perk to a Houston fan. It's like, yeah, but Parker, we get to go play Memphis, and I enjoyed those games. Right now, we're still kind of looking for that in the Big 12. Kind of Tech, kind of Iowa State. You mentioned Kansas State in football. Can something be brewing there? Is there any argument a Kansas State person would have as to, aside from a couple $1 million a year, which I think you can find other sponsors for if Yormark is the businessman we think he is there any argument for a Kansas State fan to say, no, but go get Memphis? We want Memphis specifically.
No, honestly, I don't think that there's an argument as in a Kansas State standpoint to be like Memphis makes sense for the conference, because when you're looking at other teams, I just don't see that being a potential right suitor. Personally, if you're going to go and talk about adding ones in the Big 12 area, if you're not going to go out to different geographical regions like Gonzaga or like UConn, because I do think that's a smart business model. And Brett Yormark is trying to make sure he hits every time zone. That's why you got the West Coast. So we can get that late night swag for football games. We're seeing that happen on Friday nights with
which,
for example,
I don't mean to interrupt you. Living in Texas, playing in the Pacific time zone on a Saturday night, that is brutal.
Oh yeah, imagine. Yeah, I mean West Virginia and Cincinnati, those guys got to do it from being over there too. Yeah, exactly. Insane stuff. So, but what I see from it is, if you're going to go for after Memphis, I think you just stand back and wait. You are in no rush. This is going to break down, and when it breaks down, whether the Big 12 has the first pickings or not, there are going to be great programs sitting there ready to go. The Big Ten's not going to take a whole bunch of programs. The SEC is not going to take a lot either. So you're going to have either teams that get kicked out of those programs, like, for example, if you're talking Big 12 area, potentially a Arkansas, potentially a Mizzou, potentially a Nebraska, which make a lot of sense. Some former Big 8 conference teams, things like that would make a lot more sense, at least on the traditional standpoint. But Yormark I wouldn't say he doesn't care, but he's got a bigger picture for this conference. So I think that he's going to be a little bit more patient, wait for the right big fish to drop. And I think that's more of like, I know we've said we weren't going to talk about the ACC too much, but I think that's more like a Florida State, a Clemson, or potentially one in the East like UConn, not ACC, but that kind of team, or potentially even like a Syracuse, which I don't think is a great program, but just to hit that type of geographical region.
Well, and we're going to run a little bit longer because I think that's an interesting thought process, right? Like, let's say Florida State and Clemson blow up the ACC and go to the SEC. It's not like they're working towards it. I don't think that's that crazy that it happens. Let's say they go. Let's say those academic schools I mentioned, Virginia, Duke, Stanford, Cal, they go Big Ten. Again, feels like a fit. Totally get it. You're still left with Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech, like
Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech's pretty academically strong school, actually. But I guess what I'm getting at here is like there's still plenty of Big 12 feeling schools
for sure
that are better ads.
Georgia Tech would be a good fit because that's what Atlanta area. Yormark's looking for those big regions, right? And you can Miami potentially could be there as well, which is a big name, a big brand. If they didn't join the Big Ten or the SEC, if it was just Florida State and Clemson in this type of scenario, Miami would be a great fit for the Big 12. It might hurt the Knights of UCF, but it would be a great fit for the Big 12. And then you also have other teams like North Carolina, Duke. I can't see those two getting split. I just can't see that happening. I think they get carried over somehow, just like BYU and Utah did. So whether that's the Big 12 or the ACC, or they find themselves going independent, that would be a good win. And to me, I'd rather have North Carolina than Memphis when you're talking from a basketball and a football standpoint.
Especially with the Bill Belichick swag. I would even look at Duke football, frankly, I mean, they've got sneaky talent every couple of years. The Mensa signing in the last offseason is a big deal too.
And they did that without Elko, right? That's a brand new coach over there, just a couple of years in, a coach that left to go to the SEC. Now they got a new program going up. Just because they're a basketball school, they're one of those powerhouse basketball schools that lets you have a little bit of overflow with the football program. You don't get that at Memphis. You get a decent to above average basketball program, and then you get a above average, slightly above average football program. I'd say above average just for the fact because they're a G5. But if they went to the Power 4, they're not going to be above average. They're going to be right in that same level right now, or is probably what West Virginia is. I mean, will they get as good as Houston? I think that'd be tough to tell because Houston's got a notch ahead of them.
Well, and again, Houston was a pretty strong American team there for a second before coming over in football, and then they had to change coaching staffs. Now, I will point out that they got a good staff in place now. I think things are really starting to hum in the right direction. 5-star quarterback class 2020, all that kind of stuff. And how they're going to take care of the 5-star quarterback, that's a transition, Christian, is through NIL money that I'm still wondering where it comes from. But Dellinger, because he continues to drop bombs, and moving into the third segment here, Dellinger said in an article basically that this big change we thought was coming is not actually coming. Collectives are here to stay. Collectives can pay athletes. And it sounds like there may be even some softening up on Deloitte's side of things as to how that payment happens. Is that how you interpreted the same news?
Yeah, so it sounded like the funded deals are back in the game, but it didn't really honestly, it didn't sound like much change, to be honest. If you put the settlement to the rear view mirror, right? Maybe a couple extra things, some small structure, a little bit of roster sizes still, but the clearinghouses are still going to be involved. What I read, unless there's like, if it's above a certain threshold, but I mean, it didn't sound like much has changed. Like if you lived under a rock for the last year, maybe just this offseason, once college football ended, this entire settlement wasn't following it at all, and now you head into this new thing, you're going to hear all this backstories about how every program or some of these major programs front-loaded their NIL this year because they were not sure what was going to happen. And then you're going to get to the next season and be like, all right, well, it doesn't sound like that really needed to happen. So I kind of had a feeling this was going to go. We saw these reports that were coming out from some of these major top programs in college football that were spending $40 to $45 million on their roster and then expected the next season to get down to that $20.5 million school from the settlement. That just wasn't going to happen, Parker. There was no way. So I think they knew that. So they had to find a way to slowly transition that in after that settlement was taken care of.
Well, and I look at like people that are looking at Congress to do some sort of regulation, or like, hey, like when Texas Tech made the big signing of Ojo, and it was the publicized $5.1 million, put the Texas Tech hat on, didn't have them in his Final Four, whatever, publicly. Derek Shelby works out a great deal, yada yada yada. And again, I live in Texas. These probably people that you don't know, but I had people texting me like, Parker, Congress has to do something about this. And I'm like, if the guy pays the taxes on the 5.1, why would they do anything? like what governing body cares? And like, this is just capitalism, and this is a company saying, hey, the starting tackle for the Houston Cougars or Kansas State Wildcats putting on my watch is worth $500,000 to me. Like you're worth what people pay you, and they're willing to pay it. I say this is just rolling with it, right? I don't think that's that crazy.
That's the difference. It's the exact same thing with fairness against the free market. You talk about capitalism. You're absolutely right. The argument that I hear from most of that conversation right there is, well, we get salary caps in the professional leagues. Well, there's also collective bargaining agreements in those professional leagues. You don't really have that in college football, at least not yet. There's been talks that they want to make that happen in order to have a salary cap or whatever the case you want to call it, but that's not there yet. So now you're in this wild, wild west yet again of really getting back to the fact where unlimited payments could return, right? Even with the fact of having somebody overseeing these, there was a quote inside of the report that said, quote, they now have eliminated one of the two checks. A collective only needs to establish a compensation range which the little will somehow formulate and lose if challenged in court. So frankly, we're back to unlimited payments.
And listen, I understand Houston's behind the 8 ball in terms of like they're late to this game. They were not in the power conferences. Did not have. Listen, we could go on a long soliloquy about how Houston got left out of the transition from Southwest Conference to Big 12, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there that would leave people a lot of upset. And how we're still playing, catch up from all of that. However, I can somewhat separate my Houston fandom that would say like a salary cap helps even this out for me, and like the human side of this kid's got 4 years or 4 and 5 years for eligibility, and that might be all they make playing this game. like maximize it to the umpteenth potential, whatever, because that's all you got. And if Tillman Fertitta at Houston, if Houston Methodist Hospital, if Chevron, some big Fortune 500 company wants to make sure the University of Houston is good at football, they can make sure of that. Is that weird? A little bit different? Yes. Should the athletes have probably been getting paid this whole time? We were talking about billions of dollars in TV contracts. I think that's fair.
Yeah, this entire offseason, I think ESPN's aired the 30 on 30 of SMU's scandal multiple times for a reason, right? So there's a lot of things to take from this. One thing that I like is the timing. I do actually like the timing from it. They finally figured out the settlement. They didn't wait to say, oh, and by the way, we're going to make sure this happens. So you're about to start the football season this year. You most likely, if you haven't already, you're behind. So I doubt that anybody, at least our programs for especially, is in a spot to where they need this right now. So you have your football program figured out. You probably have the majority, if not all of your basketball season figured out as well. So that gives you a good, let's just say 6-month range to figure out how are you actually going to figure out this new NIL, new, I put in quotation marks because you're going back to kind of the old ways, but with this small little jurisdiction added, this structure that they think that they have. How do you make sure this happens? Do you to make sure that there is a reason for them to earn this compensation? Because that's what they want. They don't want just people writing a blank check and handing it to the player. They want them to do something for their community, do something for the program to show that's why they're compensated. And it's just it's a weird structure why they want to do it, because you don't see this in other things, other private equity things, right? But that's just the way we're at when it comes to it. So I think there's a plenty of time. I like the timing behind it. But it's going to get weird. And to be honest, Parker, if this never happened, it was going to happen anyways. Things were going to happen behind the scenes. That was going to happen. As I allude back to that ESPN 30 on 30, things that were happening in the past, Now you can just put it in the forefront and then ask for a potential permission from some clearinghouse.
Right. I don't mean to throw the pooch here for folks at home, but I would imagine under whatever change that we thought was coming, those same blue blood schools, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, they were probably going to be good. And under this new system, they're probably still going to be good. It's still Davids and Goliaths. It's just how you frame it. It's just what the known part is.
Yeah, if boosters or collectives or whatever you want to call them want to win and they're willing to spend their money towards their university, their program, what makes you think that something like this was going to change the way they can spend their money, right? That's not going to change. And I think they knew that. So I think they're just trying to find a way, even if it's just for a percentage of the people, right? Or a percentage of the programs, because it might not even be able to control some of these top programs. That might not be enough. They might be willing to just say, go ahead and send us to the courts and we'll deal with it 20 years down the road, because that's obviously what happened with this structure. But if that does happen, then you might have some small structure to help this move along and maybe get some sort of, again, idea and just foundation of maybe trying to make this make more sense.
That's Christian Rauh, Locked On Kansas State. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs. All kinds of Big 12 things all summer long on both networks. Get us for free wherever you get your podcasts. Bring out the Coogs and Cats one time here in a crossover edition. Check out Locked On College Basketball for a second listen. I'm sure those guys are talking about the basketball side of this Memphis deal as well. So go check out Andy, Isaac, and the great work they do over there. Locked On Coogs and Locked On I'm about to say Locked On Wildcats. It's Kansas State. Locked On Kansas State are both proud members of the Locked On podcast. That means your team or teams, not Memphis, every day. Go Coogs.